Hello, and welcome to the Washington Courts Report, the official podcast of the Administrative Office of the Courts. I'm your host, Patric Haerle, and for today's episode, we're going to be covering the Washington Supreme Court's Minority and Justice Commission, a commission of the Supreme Court of the state of Washington charged with the mission of ensuring that all courts in the state of Washington remain free of bias so that justice might be adjudicated in a neutral and fair manner. I'm pleased to be joined by Judge Veronica Galvan, a King County Superior Court judge and co-chair of the commission, and Frank Thomas, a senior court program analyst to the Minority and Justice Commission. Frank, Judge Galvan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
Yeah, of course. And just diving right in here. Judge Galvan, could you give us an overview of the history of the Minority and Justice Commission and how it became the permanent commission it is today?
So just a brief history. Justice Charles Z. Smith, who was a Supreme Court justice at the time, put together the task force on race here with the Supreme Court. And from that task force, the commission was commenced. That original task force commenced in 1987, probably before I know you guys were born. but that task force then became the Minority and Justice Commission, which was under the auspices and stewardship of C.Z. Smith until he retired. Then Judge Mary Yu was the co-chair of the commission, along with Justice Charles Johnson. And then Justice Yu was elevated to the Supreme Court, where she became the Supreme Court, essentially co-chair. I believe we've had a couple of other judges, including then Judge Helen Whitener, and then after Judge Helen Whitener left, I became co-chair, and then Judge Whitener is now the Supreme Court co-chair. So the history of the commission is long, and then recently we became a permanent commission. I believe it was this year, right, Frank, that we became a permanent commission? Which means that we don't have to be renewed every 6 years, because every 6 years there was a debate as to whether the reasons for our existence were still necessary. And I think that everybody agrees that we live in a world where I don't foresee in my lifetime, certainly not in my tenure on this commission, that our goals and our look at our systems of justice and how they relate to ethnic and racial bias in our courts will not be necessary, unfortunately. I would love to be obsolete.
Frank, did you have anything to add there?
I think that sums it up well, Patrick. As Judge Galvan mentioned, we from 1990 to 2025 operated on renewals by court order. And it was this year in about April of 2025 that the court decided to establish us as a standing fixture of the Washington Supreme Court so we can continue to advance the mission of a bias-free court system.
Yeah, that little bit of extra security, not having to stress of, are the lights going to get shut off for the commission at any point, can really plan for that more long-term work. Feels like a huge boon.
100%.
So, Frank, sticking with you here, could you give us some insight into some of the goals of the Minority and Justice Commission, and how does the commission accomplish these with its work?
Absolutely. So as we alluded to, the Minority and Justice Commission is tasked with this fairly broad mandate, and indeed more of our mission makes clear that we have this very weighty task of investigating and eradicating all instances and impacts of racial, ethnic, and cultural bias on our state court system. At the same time, we are not an authoritative entity of the judiciary that takes up jurisdiction over legal issues or court cases itself. And so through the iterative process, right, of really trial and error over these 35 years that the Minority and Justice Commission has been in operation, we've coalesced around some core tenets and focus areas that we prioritize to advance primarily a sense of learning and kind of growth in knowledge around the differences that marginalized communities face within our court system, and create really operate as kind of a public facing entity that provides an opportunity for a myriad stakeholders to provide feedback and impact and input on the impacts of our court system on everyday people's lives, and particularly people of color. So we do that, Patrick, through really kind of three or four primary buckets of initiatives and operations. The first and foremost is through education, and primarily judicial education. So the Minority and Justice Commission really tasks itself with being the accountable party within the judiciary for the best possible understanding of racial, ethnic, and cultural bias, and we deliver that tutelage to the judiciary in a variety of settings. For example, we have a standing bias training for newly appointed judges at Judicial College every year. You will regularly see our programs at the annual fall judicial conference, as well as the spring conferences for respective court levels, be it appellate courts or the trial courts, both superior and courts of limited jurisdiction, where we're presenting new scholarship, new best practices related to eliminating the impacts of bias in court proceedings. And so judicial education really represents the core focus of our operations. In addition to that, we engage in a great deal of community outreach that is really, again, to be that kind of public facing entity for the Supreme Court that can solicit community input and get that real lived experience knowledge incorporated into considerations of many of the administration of justice issues that the court has to take up. We also do considerable workforce diversity initiatives supporting diversity within the judiciary. And lastly, what has kind of been the original foundation of the Minority and Justice Commission, going back to when it was a task force in the late 1980s, is a focus around research and reporting on the disparate and disproportionate impacts of court processes and policies on different litigants, and particularly litigants of color.
Wearing a lot of different hats there. It's definitely not a narrow commission by any metric. So, one thing I wanted to touch on is the annual symposium the Minority and Justice Commission holds every year. It's a big event with a lot of planning going into it, and every year is a different topic covering a pressing issue facing the court system. Judge Galvan, starting with this year's symposium and reflecting on past symposiums, could you tell us about some of the impacts these events have helped make over the years?
Well, again, I think obviously correlation and causation are very different things. But what I think the symposiums offer is context and nuance for many issues that come before the court, wherein oftentimes you're limited to the facts. When you decide a case, you're limited to the facts that are before you. And oftentimes you don't have an overall understanding of the context within which some of these things occur. And I'll give you an example. This year, we talked about call to justice for Indigenous peoples. And we looked at the context of the Indigenous experience within this country. We looked at tribal sovereignty, what it means. We looked at gender-based violence and how that disproportionately impacts tribal communities. We looked at the Child Indian Welfare Act and the reasons for that act and why that act is so important within the context, for example, of generational genocide and the removal of children from their families, from their communities, from their traditions and their language, and the impacts that that has had for generations. Because again, we don't make decisions in a vacuum. We don't want to, right? Because we have to understand what those decisions bring to the table. And so for us, what's very important in any symposium that we do as we seek to educate ourselves and interact with our Supreme Court about some of, again, the context and nuance within which these actions occur, we try to underpin everything with that academic information, with data, with actual research, with actual understanding of how we got here. So we've had very, very scientific presentations that we combined again with people who have had direct impacts of some of the court decisions. So when we talk about the juvenile brain development, we're also talking about juveniles who've been impacted by tremendously long sentences, for example, and the changes that are wrought within the context of their development, and whether our programs and the court's decisions take into consideration a person's developmental phase when it comes to you know morality, if you will, when it comes to how do we define people taking responsibility for their actions and the decision making that they engage in when they're not fully developed beings. Um, we talk about issues of jury diversity, for example. And what those things have led to is, in many instances, even more research and more study on our part. But in many instances, we can see a direct correlation of how educating our judicial officers leads to better decision making. We can point to talking about juvenile brain development in 2014 and some subsequent um, decision making that address some of these issues and put it into context using some of the underpinnings of the research and of the knowledge of what juvenile brain development means. We can look at how currently we are involved in a very significant study of jury diversity and the impacts of jury diversity on our court systems. And we can look at the importance of a diverse jury. And I think that was in 2017, and the subsequent creation of GR 37 and all of the impacts that's had on jury diversity. So again, we can see some correlates between some of the symposia and some of the decisions that have really underpinned some of the things that we learned within these contexts, and really kind of help drive, from our perspective, especially the MJC's perspective, how we take stances on policy oriented questions that involve and impact, particularly systemically excluded communities in our region, and frankly across the country. I think that we are very good about that, and really trying to underpin it with the understanding that there is research and data and not just knee-jerk reactions to some of these issues. And I think that that's kind of really helped us with in terms of our credibility, because we also want those answers for ourselves, not just so that we're out there talking about how we feel, but about what it is and what the data shows, so that when we reach our decisions and we can do so within that context. Frank, anything you think we should add?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Patrick. Judge Galvan is being gracious in not tooting the horn of the Minority and Justice Commission, as of course there are so many players and so many stakeholders who contribute to positive change and affecting real meaningful reforms that improve people's court experiences in their lives. Nonetheless, I think it should be celebrated some of the substantial impacts that the symposium series has had over the years. In addition to some of the examples Judge Galvan pointed out around adolescent brain science that was presented to the court really at the onset of Miller versus Alabama at the U.S. Supreme Court level, opening the door for smarter jurisprudence in terms of how we treat developing minds within particularly criminal law, and jury diversity as well, at which part we still have more going on 10 plus years now of a jury diversity initiative that really was given life thanks to that symposium. You can point to other successes like the massive reforms made in this state around legal financial obligations and the harms to impoverished and low income residents. By some accounts, national watchdogs for legal financial obligation LFO policy cite Washington State as having the best LFO framework in the nation, thanks to the subsequent reforms that came after we convened the LFO consortium and presented to the Supreme Court. And in recent years, our focus on the changing demographics of our incarcerated residents here in Washington State. And many changes have happened in the realm of criminal law over the past 25 years that present unique and novel challenges to issues like life and long sentences, to issues like the growing proportion of incarcerated people who are women and girls, and particularly women and girls of color, and looking at larger structural issues as well, like the social determinants of health and the role of race and the law in shaping people's health outcomes and life outcomes, has been really, I think, groundbreaking foundational work. And we're really proud to have the privilege to get a whole day from the Supreme Court to present on these emergent topics every year.
Yeah, and I think that really just shows why it's been made a standing committee recently. The variety in these topics of which impacts are being made, anything from legal financial obligations to juvenile brain development to social determinants of health, are really such a wide umbrella that the Minority and Justice Commission is casting and making an impact in. I think that's huge. And like you said, we appreciate Judge Galvan's graciousness, but yeah, these wins should absolutely be celebrated by both of you, doing some important work for the Washington's judiciary. So, speaking of doing important work for Washington's judiciary, Justice Mary Yu, co-chair of the Minority and Justice Commission, or until recently the co-chair, Justice Helen Whitener, is now taking that position, recently announced her retirement. Judge Galvan, could you touch on the work Justice Yu has done for the commission and how it has evolved in her tenure as co-chair?
I think Justice Yu just took this commission to a whole different level through her leadership. I think Justice Yu really was very cognizant of the importance when we're addressing issues of race uh, and ethnic fairness, of the importance of having data and academia. She understands that, frankly, we're going to be scrutinized at a level that no other commission is going to when we are making statements or claims about policies or procedures or processes that are unfair, and that we have to underpin it with actual solid evidence. And I think that has really helped us in terms of getting ourselves together for policy positions that we may take on several different issues, whether it be second look opportunities to juvenile justice issues, to, again, jury diversity. I think Justice Yu has also been very inclusive in terms of broadening the stakeholders um, that come to the table on these issues. She was very inclusive in making sure that we embrace community stakeholders to a degree that I think had not been considered when it was originally formed. And I think that's because we were at the time limited, right? The Minority Justice Commission was one of the first commissions of its kind. Justice C.Z. Smith was visionary. Um, and within that context, not just locally, but nationally, formed the National Consortium on Race and Ethnic Fairness in the Courts, which still goes today, which again was one of the first of its kind. So Justice Yu, I think, has, and her leadership, have taken that to a whole different level. I think her consistent expectations of what and how we should engage in this work have really assisted us in moving this commission forward in ways that I don't think were foreseen at the time that it was created. I think uh, she has really given a lot of freedom to those who work on this commission to come forward with their ideas and their how they want to see the commission move forward. And I think it has been just extraordinary. She's going to be missed. I can't tell you how much she's going to be missed, because that is an extraordinary hole to fill. And I appreciate that Justice Yu has really tried to make sure that other people were able to follow in her footsteps and were able to step in, but that void is immense, and it's going to take some time. I'm very happy to have Justice Whitener. I think she's an ideal candidate to step into this because of her own experiences and her own um, real concern with some of the policy issues that we deal with daily. And her prior experience on the MJC, I think, is going to be very helpful. But Justice Yu is a once in a just like Justice Smith. These are people who are once in a generation leaders. Um, and I liken it to ripples on a pond, right? They are very large rocks in a very small pond. They are going to cause ripples for generations to come. And I think that I appreciate the impact that she's made because I see it. I've seen it in real time. I've been privileged to be by her side as we've done this work. And but the benefits of this are going to be felt in generations to come. Just like Justice Smith may not have foreseen and didn't get to see a lot of the what he created get to the point where it is now. I think Justice Yu, um, we can't even comprehend at this juncture the impacts that all of this work is going to be having for the future. We get some sense of it, but I really think again it's a generational uh, thing, and the impacts are going to be felt for years to come. Washington State is able to do the work it does because of the work of its commission in terms of issues of race and fairness in the courts. Without the MJC, we wouldn't have a GR 37. Without the MJC, we may not have some of the more forward-thinking decisions that we have. We might not have LFO reform. We might not have some of the juvenile issues that have come up. And I think that it's important. I don't want to toot our horn, but at the same time, I do want to acknowledge that we have led in many ways on these issues. And I would be remiss if I didn't say we have been blessed in this work with people like Frank Thomas, like Molly Goff, with people like Cynthia De Los Trinos and Chanel Rhimes, people who brought themselves with Cynthia, people who brought their experiences and their work ethic and their passion to the table to really, really move us forward. Because at the end of the day, even we judges are volunteers on this. We do this in addition to all of this stuff. So we're great with ideas, but to see those ideas through, that takes people, and the people that we've been blessed to have as our staff have really, really rocketed us up. And I can't emphasize enough how important that part is, because without them, we aren't here. So.
Extremely well said. Anyone speaking from my own experience, anyone who has worked with Justice Yu or Frank or Molly or Cynthia knows, yeah, the commission has been in extremely good hands. So absolutely important. Hit that on the head. And like you said, you don't want to toot your own horn. I encourage the tooting of the own horn personally. Frank, do you have anything to add there?
I think Judge Galvan summed it up well. I'll only add, Patrick, I've been in this role serving as senior staff for MJC for 6 years now. Been the privilege of my life and career. And so much of that I owe to Justice Yu's leadership, and above and beyond being a wonderful boss who is open minded, who is wise, who is fearless. She also took the time to mentor so many folks like myself and many of my colleagues that Judge Galvan mentioned in this role, and so many others. And her willingness not only to do the work herself, but to cultivate the belief in others that they can contribute meaningfully to systemic change or to contributions to what's going right within our legal system as well, are ubiquitous throughout our state. I feel really privileged to have been a part of that legacy also.
Of course, I think privilege is the exact right word for that, to be able to contribute to just quality work like this. So, getting close to the end there, Frank or Judge Galvan, is there any other recent work or programs from the Minority and Justice Commission you'd like to highlight? We've highlighted a lot of the overarching stuff, but maybe getting down a little more to the details of some smaller programs people might not know about.
So I don't know if people are aware that we do a lot of work on pipeline programs. Even on our commission, we have law students because we are, and I think Justice Yu again was very prescient in making sure that we did this. We have law students who participate very, very fully in the work that we are doing, because we are training the next generation of lawyers, and we're training the next generation to take over the work that we're doing and making sure that we have them where they need to be. We do pipeline work with youth and law forums. So we're talking like uh, middle schools and high schools. We send many of our commission members, including judges and lawyers, to these programs to go talk to students. We support the programs. We have a read campaign, which came about during COVID, and that read campaign sends books that are age appropriate, but typically by authors of color and LGBTQ plus authors, and oftentimes those stories have characters that youth can see themselves in. And we send them to local schools, and over 200 schools across the state of Washington have received books from this program, and it's been a wonderful campaign. It really pairs well with the Supreme Court's overall read campaign, where the Supreme Court has encouraged reading, and they make their own bookmarks, and so the Minority Justice Commission has added to that by making sure that we have, again, diverse and inclusive literature that is provided to students of all ages and that is age appropriate. And I have to do a shout out to our librarian, who has also at the Washington State Supreme Court, who has also identified many of this stuff. I mean, the first year, I think many of us were identifying our personal authors and personal favorites, and I'm sending, all the stuff that I've read, just as you, and our librarian has been wonderful in undertaking this task and working with us. So those are some small things that I don't know or think that maybe people don't realize that we also participate in. Again, we are a small commission. We're not big, but we are mighty. And I think we have a legislative team that looks at legislation and weighs in on those issues, and we are very, very cognizant of the importance of this work.
I think small but mighty is a good way to put it. Whenever I walk by after the read campaign and see all those books, boxes in the Temple of Justice of books going out to schools, I'm always so impressed by just the volume of books going out, of quality reading going out to schools around the state. Frank, did you have anything to add of things you want to highlight of Minority and Justice Commission's work?
Yeah, appreciate it, Patrick. A couple things come to mind. I don't want to give the exhaustive list because we'd be here all day talking about the things we have our fingers in the honey pot, as it were.
Of course.
But there are a couple projects I am really proud of and would love the opportunity to shout out. The first is our continued focus on improving access to jury participation and really supporting the representativeness of juries, this dedicated mission through our jury diversity initiative to establish juries that look like the communities that we all reside in themselves. And the hallmark of our jury diversity initiative is the statewide juror demographic survey that we partner with Whisker to conduct throughout the state. And that's really helped us leaps and bounds have a better understanding of what the composition of our jury pools look like in Washington state. And we are certain that it will continue to bear fruit in terms of informing courts on both best practices to support juror participation and also illuminating some of the challenges that we have still to overcome in having representative juries. The other project, Patrick, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our one substantive focus that is a long-standing initiative and really an indelible imprint of Justice U's focus and priorities on youth who are involved in our justice system with our dedicated Youth Justice Subcommittee. And this year, we were very proud to produce a first of its kind report looking at the state of youth criminal legal diversion here in Washington. The roughly 80-page report you can find online if folks are interested, was as much an exercise in documenting what we don't know about how youth diversion operates, but also there was groundbreaking findings and research that went into developing that report and ultimately the recommendations of how we can both continue to improve our understanding of youth criminal diversion and continue to expand opportunities in a way that is meaningful and prudent to concerns about the well-being of our communities and public safety and the like. So got to shout out our statewide diversion report from 2025.
Of course, and that's a great segue to mention. I will be linking to the Minority and Justice Commission website in the YouTube and webpage description on the Law Courts website. And also, I'll be linking to the Minority and Justice Symposium from this year on TVW was recorded. It is a great watch. I highly recommend anyone who has time to check it out. Well, Judge Galvan, Frank, I really want to thank you both for coming on today. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to leave us off on?
Um, yeah, I think it's the best commission around. I will die on that hill. Um, I think the work that, in all seriousness, I think that again, for a very small commission of volunteer members, I think that this commission has had an outsized impact on jurisprudence in the state of Washington, not directly, but through our educational efforts of educating judicial officers. I think that we have improved the quality of justice in the state of Washington. I've seen those improvements throughout my tenure as a judge. This is my 23rd year as a judicial officer, and I have seen pendulums swing. I have seen, um, policies come and go, but I can say that my tenure on the Minority and Justice Commission, I have seen some extraordinary improvements in how we dispense justice, in how we look at issues of race and ethnic bias, and how we are making very, very uh, valid and efforts to address the issues, to have the uncomfortable conversations, to engage not just with anecdotal evidence, but with actual data that underpins all of the issues that we are trying to address to ensure that when we are scrutinized and we are questioned, that we have our receipts. And I think that that's very important in this work. And again, I shout out to the staff that makes this happen, because we are all volunteers and our job is not necessarily this, but I'm of the firm belief that you can't just be on the bench. That if you are just on the bench doing the work, you're doing it wrong, because systems, like people, are able to evolve, and sometimes they need help in that evolutionary process. And I think of us as a little bit of a catalyst to make that occur. So that's the thoughts of me and in our commission. And I think, like I said, it's the greatest one to be a part of.
Yeah, you love to hear it. Gotta have people who are passionate about the work doing the important work. Frank, did you have anything you want to end us out off on?
Well, to that accord, Patrick, to as we alluded to kind of take up the broad mandate of the Minority and Justice Commission, it takes a village. And so I first, want to shout out and thank our member commissioners, many of them judicial officers, legal professionals, leaders within the community, within law school communities, who take time out to dedicate themselves to the productive work of the Minority and Justice Commission, to our partners throughout the 39 counties within their respective court systems, who voluntarily partner with us to make improvements, to learn more about how our processes and policies impact litigants. And also to our many partners, I have a short list here, inside and outside the Supreme Court and the administrative office of the courts, who help us out. The court staff over at the Temple of Justice, led by Ashley Lipford, are tremendous partners with us on many of our seminal projects. Our crew over with the law library do things like the Read Project with us, Rob Mead's group, and our embedded law librarian, Wanda Barrett. The staff, my colleagues with the Supreme Court Commissions team over here in the Office of Court Innovation, led by our commissions manager, Kelly Ambergy Richardson, and my colleague, Molly Goff, are very close partners, as Judge Galvan mentioned, who help us support our principles with data and evidence-based analyses at the Washington State Center for Court Research. Carl McCurley, their manager, our embedded equity researcher, Dr. Carl Jones, Dr. Patric Haerle, who leads the statewide jury diversity initiative, and Dr. Lindsay Beach, who has conducted research on legal financial obligations and will be taking up the mantle of youth diversion research in the state. Those are only a few of the many, many contributors that we partner with across sectors inside and outside of the judiciary who make this work even vaguely possible, and ultimately, I think, have led to many of the successes we've talked about today.
Yeah, like you said, it takes a village. So important to shout out all those contributors. We appreciate all the work that's being done across the Minority and Justice Commission. It really is important stuff. So that's where we're going to end off on for today. I want to thank you both again for coming on the show and helping shed some light on the commission. So you both have a great day, and we're signing off with that.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.